Great. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here at our first topic style session that Seek Peace is running. We just wanted to start by giving a bit of an introduction to us. I'm Kay, and if we've not had the pleasure of meeting yet, my full name's Michaela, but most people in my life call me Kay, and feel free to do so as well. I am the operations director of Seek Peace. I led on the process of registering our this work of ours as a UK charity, and my role in our work is to keep everything humming along and running well in the background. And I also support John with some of the partner-facing work that we do in the areas of my training and specialisation. Becoming a charity in the UK was a transition for us. We were supported missionaries living in West Africa. But we had this vision of being a partnering and resourcing ministry for peace-building centred mission work in regions of protracted violent conflict, which by God's grace, Seek Peace is today, for 3 ministries with, so 2 based in Nigeria, 1 based in the UK and Ghana, and with a potential new one who we're looking forward to bringing on based in Beirut, Lebanon, which will be happening soon. I also work a couple of days a week as part of a research team based out of King's College London on a 10-year-long research project called The Social Consequences of Religion, where I'm part of a team studying the social consequences of both religion and peace building, which is really fascinating to be involved in. I'm a mum. We have 2 littlies who were born during the 5 years that we lived in Nigeria. We have Abraham and Eleanor. I love music. I'm a worship leader in my local church, and I'm a keen researcher and writer. I'm currently working on developing a PhD project, which I hope to start in the next year, on the topic of the catalytic impacts of intergroup friendships, which is something that we will be sort of discussing in part today as well. Over to you, John.
And I'm John. I'm lucky enough to be Kay's husband and colleague as well. I work with our different partner organizations, helping them with consulting on areas of conflict analysis, the design of their programs, and monitoring and evaluation. Bit of an armchair theologian as well. I love, since we moved to Nigeria and before that as well, I love theology and really the intersection of theology and peace building and reconciliation. So, yeah, and that's the space we work with our partners in as well, how we can help to equip the church and organizations that work alongside the church, how we can equip them to be involved in peace building and reconciliation work in their communities. And also I get involved in a local church that we go to in the UK and have a role there as a teaching pastor. And I'll introduce Agbo briefly as well, but you'll hear more from him as we go through this today. So Agbo's on the call today. Welcome, Agbo. He is the Director of Programs for Crudan, which is an organization we work with here in Nigeria, just Nigeria. And they have 206 partners throughout Nigeria in different churches, individuals and organizations getting involved in local development and peace building.
Thank you. Okay, well, today, as advertised, we're exploring the ideas of the priest and the prophet and how conflict disruptive friendships, we believe, help to anchor the church to both. So we're going to have a quick look at the image of the priest, and we're going to look at the image of the prophet. We're going to explore some of the history, particularly from a Western perspective, of Christian action in modern times. And we're going to consider the words of Desmond Tutu, his famous words to the church during apartheid South Africa. There comes a point where we need to stop just pulling people out the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. The style of today will be very conversational. John and I'll have a bit of a chat. And then after we've had a bit of a conversation, we'll look at some examples and some stories. We'll hear from Agbo. And then, as I mentioned, we'll get into some of the things that are going on in our work that are kind of critical to the themes we're discussing today. And yeah, we'll talk about both the work we're doing now and the work that we have coming up. So, yeah.
Yeah, and this is a funny one for me because obviously Kay and I have lots of conversations and we talk to each other all the time. It's great to have so many people on this call, and as well when we send the recording for people to listen to as well. We're not used to having such an audience to our conversations, but I guess we're going to have to get used to it as we go. We'll try and be reasonable with this conversation. So, Kay, well, let's open by you're working on this research project with King's College London, which is looking into the role religion plays within peace building, investigating those things a little bit. And you're delving into a lot of the history of these things. And we want to provide a little bit of context around that before we talk about 2024 and the work we're involved in. So, Kay, do you mind giving us a bit of context for this? Yeah, what's led us to modern times and the church interacting in development and peace building work?
Yeah, sure. Well, what's been really fascinating to me in kind of researching and studying this area was kind of looking back and realizing how a lot of our processes and a lot of the functions that we kind of exist in today in the aid development and its intersection with Christian mission and Christian work has sort of come out of some changes that occurred during the interwar period. So that was between the First and the Second World War in the early 20th century, and how some of the major Christian NGOs that we have today, they actually began, I found this incredibly fascinating, as movements of response to many of the social injustices that were faced during this interwar period in the early 20th century. And Christian movements were actually really significant in campaigning, particularly to their Western governments. And Christian missionaries as well were part of putting significant pressure on Western governments to encourage them by saying, we have an obligation as global citizens to provide aid to countries that have really been decimated by the effects of the war and the unjust regimes that contributed to that interwar period as well. And there, I also found it really significant and fascinating that where we look at today, it didn't come from nothing. It came from a set of processes, and it comes from history. And that history, to one degree or another, is important when we think about the work of peace building today. And there actually, at this point in the early to mid 20th century, there was some really significant policies, governmental policies that were instilled at this time. The US foreign policy was really significant around the installation of democratic systems. And I don't know if many of you may be aware, but it was a very strong sentiment within United States policy during the 20th century, even to today, that democracies don't go to war with other democracies. And so part of the thrust of UN foreign policy was to try and install Western democratic systems as being the approach that the US had and has today in trying to instill peace in the global system. And this actually, it had a lot of influence, as you can imagine. It was largely adopted as the approach and the assumption of the United Nations, and this definitely laid the foundation and significantly impacted the assumption of what development and international development work and peace building included and what it is. And I think you could probably imagine, this is a short summary, but this is all tied to some quite big assumptions about both statehood and about economics, some being very, fruitful, and others being maybe areas that need to have more exploration and in and of themselves have impact. And as this happened, just to set some context, we have today this sort of bilateral aid machine that grew and developed. And a bit of a far cry from its origins of Christian missionaries and Christian movements calling for their governments to respond to the injustices of the world wars. It's sort of it just sort of has become this thing that works together and reinforces other systems that run our world and contribute to the running of our world today, as unjust sometimes as they can be. And at its worst expression today, bilateral aid, or aid that is government government given to another government, has been used as a tool of soft power between the donor and the recipient nation. The UK itself has famously been criticised at times for aid for trade relationships. So, the use of aid as a way to maneuver particular political moves in the global system. And it can be quite, it's not all good, it's not all bad, but it can be quite insidious. And with all these trends, we now have this grant bidding system that really sets the agenda and the rules of both international development and the international relations system as well. And our partners like Crudan, our partners like CHIPS, CFM, we ourselves are all a part of this. These are restrictions. These all have effects on the work in which we're a part of.
Okay. So to summarize, it's like a lot of these movements started off from like a Christian mindset, or there are strong Christian influences to these things. And over time, they've become more part of the agendas of governments, or they've become more bureaucratized as well. And we're not really saying, I guess, are we saying this? But I don't think we are saying we want to go back to those times. There's no point, I think, crawling back to a sort of utopic past, because we do that a lot about the past. We say it was all good back then, but now it's all wrong. But I think there were challenges with that approach, and there are definitely challenges with the approach as it is now. But Kay, in 2024, as you've set a bit of the context for us, in 2024, what do you feel like are the range of Christian responses, or the range of different ways Christians still get involved in these dynamics of peace building and international development?
Thank you. I think first to say it is important definitely not to idealize the past, and to remember that a lot of the things that have contributed in our modern history to where we are now came out of the atrocity of war and the atrocity of violent conflict. So keeping that in mind is always necessary when we are looking at change processes in peace building. But I think, like, to go back to your question, I'm not going to touch on all the ways that Christian movements and Christian para-church organizations and local churches have responded. But there are many different ways that we can see that, that Christian work has kind of evolved in the last 80 years or so. A lot of the early prophetic work of missionaries and churches have eventually become increasingly bureaucratic and professional. For example, in the post-war period, Catholic Relief Services and World Vision, that there were some significant times in their histories where they moved to some degree or another, downplay their religious identities in adapting to the new climate of sort of state-based aid funding and bilateral aid funding, and to promote, their professionalism and their capacity to deliver local resources and care for communities that were deeply impoverished and deeply divided. And that was one clear way that some Christian work has evolved in one trajectory. On the other hand, there have been clearly many Christian mission organizations that have deliberately not got involved in either aid or development, and have expressed that they see it as a compromise to dilute their overtly Christian identities and to focus instead. And we can see the pattern of they hone in specifically on mouth-to-ear gospel preaching and church planting as the continued way that they push forward and react in this time. And some of these Christian ministries have honed in, for example, on issues of Christian persecution, and often with great legitimacy, but there has been a trend to narrowly define persecution in these times as a specifically religious issue. And at times we have to be conscious not to, and there is a danger of reducing that down to being one issue rather than seeing kind of the multifaceted system and or regime level conflict that has contributed to experiences of persecution where religion is one factor. And you and I, John, we've had experience in that too. We've seen that firsthand in the times we've lived in Nigeria too. And finally, there is also, I just want to touch on this other movement afoot that many people might be familiar with or might hear from different parts of our world, the world of Christian movement that we all live in, where throughout the last century we see people who have supported the departure from kind of like the status quo agenda and the dynamics of whatever was the current like system norm. And I think, you know, the most famous example of that would be Martin Luther King Jr., Desmond Tutu, as I mentioned earlier, Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Second World War Germany, and I'd even go so far as today to say perhaps Mantha Isaac in a Palestinian pastor in Bethlehem, in a church in Bethlehem, in a Bible college in Bethlehem. Their contributions have been founded often on theological visions of liberation, reconciliation, and restorative conceptions of justice, and they have primarily focused on kind of regime disruption, is what I would say.
We started off this conversation, we've framed some of this conversation around ideas of priest and prophet. We want to look into that a little bit, but also probably, I don't know if you're like me, or I grew up in a Pentecostal church, but I grew up with you know, Sunday school and lots of these images of priest and prophet. And so for me, the priest was, I'm thinking of like an Old Testament temple, and he's out in the courtyard, he's doing the sacrifices. But beyond that, he's also a part of everyday community life. Like he reinforces the rhythms of the faith within the community. He plays that everyday role. And then images I've got in my head of the prophet is more someone like John the Baptist or someone like Jeremiah or Ezekiel, and they're quite theatrical people. And their role is to really speak truth to power. And they're less likely to join you for a meal like a priest would, and they'll probably criticize the things you're eating and where you're getting those things from. So they're really trying to pull apart or trying to identify where are the injustices in the system. And so, Kay, in this framework that we're talking about, you set the context for it. What do you think are the roles of priest and prophet within these modern movements that you're talking about?
Yeah, well, I think one way I've read it or heard it said is that the role of the priest is often to kind of solidify the great move that's happened, you know, being pioneered by the prophet, you know, so something has come, there's been radical change that's happened, but there's still the function of everyday, like you mentioned, the rhythm of life, the rhythm of faith, the rhythm of livelihood, and having people, you know, support that and champion that, and to do that in a way that's faithful to our faith, to our heritage. And so I don't want to I've definitely read people that go, you know, the role of the prophet and the role of the priest, and they have one, it's easy to like go one camp or the other. Whereas I think both is necessary, you know, when radical change is needed. We see in history, you know, we see in the Bible, God raises up these prophetic figures that kind of push and propel forward a need within Christendom towards the change that reflects his heart. But then the priestly role solidifies that and makes sure that that's happening, and it's going for a long time. And so, you know, I think for me, when we're reading about the NGO, the rise of, you know, Catholic Relief Services, World Vision, these figures in our system today have played that kind of priestly role. They've taken, you know, they've taken the campaign and the learnings from people that have seen the atrocities of war and seen what it's done in communities, especially those that are highly, you know, impoverished, and has really tried to encourage to sort of to get the most from that system for those that need it the most. And I think, you know, like I mentioned, I think it's probably pretty clear from this discussion, but you know, we've got on the prophetic side, we've got people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, we've got Martin Luther King Jr., we've got others, we've got people today, you know, who are often, you know, standing, like if we just think about things going on in our world today, there's a lot of people that, you know, would be preaching free Palestine, and that's the role that they feel that God has kind of asked them to play in that prophetic work that they're doing. So I think this is the role of the prophet, you know.
Yeah, and we're talking about this a little bit today because it's something that we think about in the work that we get involved with Seek Peace and our partners, and trying to understand how we balance these roles, like you said, Kay. It's not always wanting to fully go down the extreme of adopting that prophetic role, even though there's aspects of that are so important, and it's not always going down the aspect of fully adopting that priestly role and not being able to ever speak truth to power in any way. And it makes me think of projects that we work with in Ghana with CHIPS, and there's lots of aspects they work with, or lots of projects they work in, local communities, microfinance projects, projects to help people to buffer their lives a little bit for when there is hardship. They have a savings, or they have some way of not being so affected. And lots of those projects that play that priestly role in the community come alongside people and care. And some of the work we've been involved with there is to work with the teams to go, okay, well, how do we also take this voice a level up, or a layer up? So we're working in the grassroots setting with lots of local people who have continue to suffer a lot from the situation they live in, the local conflict and the local tensions between people groups. How do we work in those communities to be a voice, be that prophetic voice as well as the priestly voice? How can we gather local elders and talk about the divisions that persist? How can we work together as a community to identify more fully where these conflicts are coming from, and who at these different levels is contributing to that? And once that's identified, how do we as a project start to address those things? How can we get people in the room and have dialogue about these things? And the computer center project, which we often talk about, and we'll talk a bit more about today, I think they do this really beautifully, and we've learned a lot from this in that they run computer training for youth in the community who don't have many opportunities, but they also gather elders, religious leaders from both Muslim parts of the community and Christian parts of the community, and then bring them together as well to discuss the points of tension in the community. And there's a space there for people to challenge, and people to, often we talk about peace building, and sometimes people will say, okay, well, that means there's no challenge, or that means there's you always want everything to be calm. But often we talk about as well that sometimes peace building is about actually conflict, and it's about bringing about conflict at the right time and in the right way, so that the conflict isn't buried and it comes out in a more ugly form later on. And I think you start to do that when you balance these roles of, Paul talks about it. If you're just playing that prophetic role of always calling truth to power, and that's all you do, and you can sometimes miss out on those more priestly roles of providing care in the community. And Paul talks about it as being, you can have all these things, but if you don't have love, you're just a resounding gong, right? And sometimes we're working on projects and we're like, are we being a resounding gong here?
Yeah.
Or are we also coming alongside people and playing that is the project coming alongside people and playing that priestly role as well?
Yeah, and I think, like, for us, peace building, as we've gotten more involved in it, it has so much hope in it, because it's so intuitive. It allows, in our mission, in our witness to Jesus as our Savior, this ability to pivot, to be adaptive to the needs of a community, and to really be somebody that's optimistic about change, and optimistic that can be done in ways that are both robust but also peaceful. And then, we also, I think we're now getting into the next part of the discussion, but there's this fascinating figure in peace building that we have become more acquainted with, and these are the figures of disruptive friends, or conflict disruptive friendship. And I think we might just talk to the story that originally was one of the stories that really compelled us to move to Nigeria back in 2000. And I think we heard this story first in 2015. We moved in 2016, and we lived there for nearly 5 years. But it was the story, John, do you want to touch on it with Gabe and with Abdul in Bukuru?
Yeah, sure. I think as well, we often talk about this stuff at the project level, and we work a lot with projects, and Kay and I are often talking, is it always familiar with people to always be talking about projects? So we also want to bring it down, and we often are trying to bring it down to individuals as well, and what it means for us in our lives as individuals. And like Kay's saying, the roles within communities that individuals play in having these disruptive friendships that we'll touch on.
Yeah, and being catalysts. Ultimately, we've become familiar with these people who play this really catalytic role, and we don't hear about them very often, but they really need to be championed more. And I find them hugely hopeful figures in our faith. Sorry, John.
And really balancing that prophetic and priestly role as well in doing it. So the story that we, you might have heard us talk about it before, but for some people this might be new as well. And the story that really motivated us to start thinking more about the interaction or how the church has a role in reconciliation and peace building was during a time of conflict in Jos, here, the city that I'm in at the moment. It started to segregate a lot into Muslim communities and Christian communities. At that time, they used to be more mixed, but there was a lot of tension in the nation through different, we don't need to go into all that, but lots of different ways that tension was fueled. And it really, one of the ways that tensions expressed itself was this segregation of Muslim communities and Christian communities. And you could find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time. And if you did, as a Christian or a Muslim, then your life could be over. And there was a time where a good friend of ours, Gabe, who's the provost of a Bible college here, he was living in a Christian community. And a Muslim man, Abdul, he's a well-known barrister within the Muslim community. He found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time. And he was running away from a mob of Christian youth. And we say Christian quite loosely, obviously, because this is a community that identifies itself with that religion. Again, don't have time to go into all the details of that. But Gabe, who's the provost of this Bible college, was able to hide Abdul, a local Muslim barrister, in his home for a number of days. And he was able to provide a place of refuge for him. And out of that, they built a friendship. Out of that time together in their house over those few days, they built a friendship, but also that friendship was knitted together over a deep pain that they both had for their communities. Abdul for his community, Muslim community, and Gabe for his Christian community. And out of that deep friendship and that deep sorrow as well for their communities was birthed the project that we work a lot with now in our current time, which is these computer training centers. They had a deep sorrow for the youth in their communities. For Abdul, these were youth in the Christian communities that were pursuing him and wanting to take his life. And for Gabe, he knew there were the regions of Muslim communities that he would be in the same situation if he went into those communities. So this radical friendship developed across these boundaries, and we hear of these a lot. This is a famous example, but there's a city close to us, Kaduna, where you've got another radical expression of that, and you can look it up online. It's called The Story of the Pastor and the Imam from Kaduna. But really, these radical stories of crossing these divides, and it's that priestly role and that prophetic role within this story. It's that priestly care and that priestly love that Christ asks us to bear. But it's also in making friendships, these radical friendships across these divides. It's also that prophetic role of you've got a conflict context that really informs, that tells you what behaviors you need to adopt or tells you the friendships that you need to have. So how are we as Christians, how are we able to see that what those norms are that are thrust upon us, that we're expected to behave in these specific ways? How can we be a radical voice to countering that and to say, well, no, that's what the conflict context is asking me to be like, but how can I actually speak against that in my actions and in my words? And part of that is these radical friendships, like we can see between Gabe and Abdul.
Yeah, and we have the joy of one of our other partners. So Gabe represents one of our partners based in Jos, CFM, and his story was, like we said, continues to inspire and convict us. We also have the joy of having Agbo with us today. John, would you like to share a little bit more about your role with Agbo and the work that you two quite often have together and the interface that you have? And then Agbo, would you like to introduce yourself and also share with us experiences of these radical catalytic friendships that you've experienced too in your work with Crudan?
Yeah, Agbo is a good friend of ours, and he is director of programs for Crudam, which is a charity here in Jos, but also has works through churches and many organizations throughout Nigeria as well. And they've had a lot of experience in peace building projects, and we're currently working with them in a project that's working with churches throughout the country. So Agbo's got a great story, so I'll let him share that.
Okay, all right. Thank you, John, and thank you, everyone. Permit me to share from one of the peace building work of Crudan. Please just do a thumbs up if you can see my screen. I want to share a presentation briefly. Okay. Okay. I'm having some challenges with sharing my screen here. Let me try again. If it doesn't, I'll just go ahead with the story. Okay. Yes. I guess you can see my story, my screen.
We can see it in your glass.
Okay. Okay. All right. The story I want to share is drawn from a peace building project that is titled Conflict, Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Prevention and Response for Peaceful Coexistence and Sustainable Peace. That was actually funded by TFON International. And we had 3 implementing partners. Crudan was the project lead for that consortium. And this project was implemented in 3 local governments in 3 states in Nigeria. And that's Jos South local government and Shendam local government areas of Plateau State. And then Boza local government in the Northeast in Borno State as part of recovery project for the extremism activities in northeastern Nigeria. So permit me to share the story from a VSLA engagement. And this story, like you can see on the screen, if you can see my screen, there's a picture of a group of people. If you see to your far right, there's a lady sitting with a bowl in front of her. The story is about her. She's known as Helen John. And if you take a look at the group, the picture, one of the things you will notice is there seems to be a predominant identity of the people in this story. This is a Muslim community, and this VSLA was actually set up for the Muslim community. But in this community, there was a Christian in person of Helen John, who is resident there. So Helen John is the only Christian as at that time within this predominant Muslim community in Bokoro that is known as Kerana. And so Helen took a bold step to also engage and indicated interest to be part of this VSLA group. And Helen was accepted into the VSLA community. And one of the things we saw or noticed was that the predominant Muslim members actually agreed and unanimously voted Helen to emerge as the chairperson of this VSLA group. And so for us, basically, there was learning in terms of demonstrating holistic missions. What was integral in the process was that this gave us a dimension to preaching the gospel as well as demonstrating the gospel, which is preaching the gospel to a sinful world and also demonstrating the gospel to a suffering world. How did this story emerge? We saw as a prophet, we saw a prophetic call of Helen to leadership. And it was so important that the members of this VSLA community also identified this prophetic call. And we saw how being a leader of this VSLA group, Helen was able to demonstrate the authority and dominion of God in the process to be able to guide this VSLA group to success. And so one of the things we also noticed that she demonstrated visionary leadership to influence the members, not just the members of the VSLA, but other structures within the community to agree that harmonious coexistence is a way to go to actualize the full potential that each and every member of that community bear. So it means that irrespective of the desire that you have, with peaceful coexistence, then it becomes very easy for you to also have a sustainable business. It becomes very easy for you to also have good sleep and other dimension of it in the community. And this was a unique opportunity for Helen to influence change from her Christian moral principles for humanity without necessarily proclaiming the gospel or preaching the scriptures to the members of this VSLA group and other members in the community. We also saw her priestly role. One of the things Helen did with her visionary leadership was also to influence relationship building. We saw cohesion within the community because she became a model of change. That was one thing that we're very excited about. The fact that Helen did not demonstrate fear in the process, irrespective of the fact that she was just the only Christian in that community, also gave rise to an opportunity where the community members also created a unique opportunity for Helen to also bring a colleague of hers to also be part of the process of the VSLA in that community. Today, now we have 2 Christians there. And one of the things we have seen around this community is negative mobilization over the years since the 2001 violent experience in Plateau State. But we are beginning to see that this is a way to go because this is a counter to negative mobilization. And also it means that this is a model to eliminate the existence of no-go areas, a situation where a person of a particular faith can really not find him or herself in other spaces of people of other faith. But the fact that the community is gradually opening up and they are inviting Christians to come back to the community and also have their lives in that community. And this is something we're celebrating so far. We also saw the demonstration of the gospel in the fact that the VSLA was actually set up to be a mechanism to mobilize funds and channel them into productive ventures. But we discovered that the platform became a platform for so many other things. For example, Helen's leadership and support of the members of the VSLA group have helped them to even identify issues that concern them. During the last general election, they spoke strongly about the issue of having even female voices in the decision-making processes in the communities. These are one of the things that we also thank God for, because this has become a mechanism to address the unique needs of the community members. She also facilitated safe spaces for interreligious dialogue. The platform has become a mechanism for interreligious conversations, and we have seen how this is a model to go, especially with the incidences around the 2 dominant religions in Nigeria. So it means we can use this community context and the model to also bring these people of these 2 great faiths together to learn from each other, and then also to see how sustainable peace can be attained. These are some of the things we've gotten, but majorly one of the other things we saw was that within this period, some of the youths from some of the Muslim youths, in quote, actually mobilized themselves, and then they set Helen's house on fire at some point. And so we saw proactive actions by the Muslim community, who did not only apprehend these culprits and submit them to security agencies, but they also took part in ensuring that Helen's properties were not ultimately consumed in the inferno. And the Muslim community also came together to also pull resources and funds together to help Helen recover some of her properties that she has lost. And this has also helped Helen to remain in the community. And that incident led to a narrative where violent confrontation is now seen from the perspective of criminality and not a monopoly of any particular religion within the community. So now the community can actually call criminality criminal, and then also let law take its full course. So still on the story, we have seen that Helen's presence has gradually provoked reflections around issues of forgiveness, healing, and restoration of relationships, because the community members have seen that coexistence is very possible, irrespective of your religion or tribe. And so for Helen to have been given the opportunity to have been part of this community, they've also seen sustained improvement in some of the activities of the VSLA group. And then they've also seen livelihood improvements in the life of the members of the VSLA group. And so they've seen that the power and the strength in togetherness, that's something else. We've also seen that the project is significantly contributing to social coexistence in a community that has been known over the years to be very notorious for reprisal attacks and also counter attacks. And this was also demonstrated in 2021 during a violent confrontation in the northern part of Jos, in Rukuba Road, where some Muslims were actually accosted and killed. One of the things Bukuru community was known for was that Bukuru would have gone up in flames. But we noticed that Bukuru took a different dimension. Bukuru demonstrated relative resilience to provocations, because we really did not see any reprisal in Bukuru, and we didn't see counterattacks as a result of the peace building initiatives by development actors in Bukuru. And so these are some of the improvements we've noticed. And we're also very excited with the work of Seek Peace because of the support Seek Peace has given to us for getting close to 2 years now. It has helped us to also look inward to see how our efforts actually contribute to some of these results that are obtainable in the community, and also helped us to learn through the process to see how we can ensure that our initiatives are localized, and then also ensure that the community members themselves are also empowered to take action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Agbo. That was a real joy to hear. It's been an absolute pleasure partnering with you and with Crudan over the last couple of years. And when you're sharing that story, particularly the time where you mentioned that Helen was under attack, or some youth had come upon her house, and the Muslim community really stood to protect her and to shelter her and from that attack. It just really draws my mind. I don't know about other people, but it draws my mind to those examples that Jesus gave in his life. The Good Samaritan, and even Jesus meeting with the Samaritan woman at the well, and this example of crossing the divide and being willing to even put yourself out in order to become one, to make your neighbor, make your enemy into your neighbor, and then your neighbor into your friend. And I think that's a part of our witness. Like, as you mentioned, Agbo, it's both the way we share our words, but it's also the ground that we're laying about what Jesus has done in our life to transform us. So I really appreciate that. John, did you want to say anything there?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Agbo. That's a really powerful story and example of what we're talking about today. Yeah, and I think balancing those two things is important in the work we're doing with Crudan, those priestly and prophetic roles as well. And yeah, it's great to be able to work with such amazing partners like Crudan and have you on the call here today, Agbo. And yeah, we look forward to getting other of our partners on these calls as well.
Thank you. We say thank you to Seek Peace, and thank you to also the contributors of your ministry. We are grateful.
Thank you, Agbo. I think we'll move now to having a chance to just talk a little bit about the work that Seek Peace has been involved in with Crudan and with our other partners. I'm going to share a screen with you in a second of some of the work that we've done over the last 12 months or so, and hopefully some of the impact you can see that it's having as we work with our partners. And then we'll switch over to talking about future work that we have coming up, and particularly we're very excited about the work that we are going to be doing in Lebanon, hopefully later in the year. And then we'll probably end the formal recording part of this call, and we'll open up for some Q&A as we bring this thing into land. So let me share my screen so John can talk. There you go. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, I think that's working. Okay,
Brilliant.
so this is just a really brief summary of some of the work we're doing with our partners. So KCTC there on the top row, that stands for Kent's Computer Training Centres, and that's the project we're talking about, gathering together Muslim youth and Christian youth, as well as elders in the community. So they've got stations throughout Jos here, and also throughout in some of the regional areas of this state, and also in Adamawa State. And we work with them to help them collect data about their outcomes. So how do they know that the work they're doing in their communities is having the results, and what can we learn from those results that we're gathering as well, and offering trainings in different areas, and also bringing other people in with different expertises to do trainings. So that's 7 local communities they're affected, and they have an enrollment of around 400 on average a year, and engagement of over 75 community elders. Then we've got CHIPS on the second row there. So CHIPS is an organization that's worked in many regions throughout the world. They previously had projects in Cyprus. They previously had projects in Uganda. Currently, they have projects in Northern Ghana and Brixton in London. So areas of southern London, which are very much affected by knife crime. So they're a Christian peace building organization working with local youth and working in local communities to build peace and to bring about reconciliation by working with churches, and also balancing those priestly roles and the prophetic roles that we were talking about before, working alongside people in areas of need, and also introducing what does the Bible and what does Scripture and what are the actions in the life of Jesus, how does that challenge us to be that prophetic voice in these communities as well. So they work with 19 rural communities in Northern Ghana, and then with Angel Town Estate in Brixton in London. And then Crudan, we've had the pleasure of hearing from Agbo about one of their projects. They work with a lot of projects throughout Nigeria, like we said, over 206 different network churches and organizations. We're working currently with them on a project that is working with churches throughout the country to help churches develop the skills to identify needs that they have in their communities, or identify common needs, maybe that these are things that contribute towards tension and conflict in the community. How can churches get better at identifying, analyzing what's going on, and identifying areas of need? And then once they've identified those things, how do they sustainably link local resources to those needs in the effort to create, they're called sustainable or church and community transformation initiatives, and with the vision of seeing the role of the church within these communities as being holistic. So as well as mouth to ear gospel preaching, how can they be that priestly role in the community as well, to care for needs and to let the church be a voice that heals divisions as well in those communities. And then I think, Kay, you're going to share a little bit about upcoming work that we have in Lebanon.
Yes, I just wanted to conclude there for us on Crudan. So on this particular project, we're working with 13 churches, but they have a wider network, as we mentioned, of 206 local member churches who are also benefiting from the project learnings that are coming out of these kind of concentrated 13 and the resources and the trainings that we're doing with them as well. Yes, I would now like to switch over to another slide to share with you. Before I do that, I was wondering, John, I'm throwing you in the deep end here, but would you be able to talk a little bit about our Beirut partner, and then I will talk about the need. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Here we go.
Sure. So yeah, we've had a couple of points of contact with these partners in Lebanon. When I was doing a master's in peace building and reconciliation at Winchester, Rula joined a call as a guest speaker, and she talked about the work they're doing in Lebanon in areas that have a high concentration of refugees and very diversely religious. And then we had another point of contact from a friend who we joined a friend in some of the work they were doing with YWAM in Northern Ireland. And when we were there, we heard about this link to Lebanon as well. And Remy, Rula's husband, had done some time in Northern Ireland on DTS and looked at really projects of reconciliation as well. And so it felt like a no-brainer for us to reach out and see how Seek Peace can support the really important work they do in Lebanon.
Yeah, so it's really exciting. They also mentioned it would be a great time for us to come together and sort of as a synergy because they have a lot of projects going on right now, and they have a great need to try and better understand the change processes and the impact that their work is having, which is all that our vision is in Seek Peace, that we would be able to support local peace builders, local peace building ministries to demonstrate the fantastic results that local churches are having in their communities towards God's vision of peace. And bridging divides. And so they have a lot of need right now, and we're very happy that we can make a great partnership with them. We just wanted to share this with you guys as our supporting churches, as our people that are interested in our work or would like to get to know us more. This does come at a cost to us, so we've worked out the numbers, how much it costs both in terms of the training, the consulting work that we do, and the funding that we provide in small grants and different ways that we support the ministries that we work with impact, with measurement, with monitoring, evaluation, learning, and with some of their infrastructural needs in that department. This would take us, this means an increase in our need financially. So taking on another partner increases our monthly partner costs from, well, you can read it there, just under £2,500 or 4,500 Australian dollars a month to around 3,200 or 6,000 a month. And at the moment, as we come into the end of financial year for both our charity and for our charity in the UK, but also the end of financial year in Australia, our end of financial year appeal this year is to focus in on how we can increase our capacity to partner more with fantastic organizations doing phenomenal work and support them further by being able to provide more grant funding and more time with them as well. And so that's what we'd like to present to you, our prayer and financial supporters at this time of the year. If that's something that you can support, if that's something you can pray for, that would be incredibly helpful to us. But yeah, I think that concludes the formal part of today, this morning for us, this evening for our Australian friends. I'm going to stop the recording now, and then we might open up for questions. John, are you able to facilitate Q&A?
Sure, better unmute myself first.
How do I stop presenting? All right, stop recording. Here we go.